What chance did a woman have in a naval courtroom, a place ruled entirely by men, where even the ink that wrote the law carried their prejudice? In the eyes of the British Admiralty, piracy was a man's crime, brutal, savage, and entirely unnatural in a woman. So when women dared to cross that line, the system did not merely punish them, it erased them. Captured female pirates were rarely shown mercy. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the so-called Golden Age of Piracy, the British Empire stretched its influence across the seas, and its justice followed behind it like a shadow. Admiralty courts, often held in distant colonies such as Jamaica or New Providence, operated not as places of fair trial, but of swift judgment. There were no juries, no appeals, no real hope. These makeshift naval tribunals were held in crowded port towns, sometimes inside converted warehouses or military outposts. The air was thick with heat and salt, and the smell of the sea mixed with fear. The accused, women who had once commanded ships or fought beside men, stood chained before judges who could not even fathom their existence. Testimonies came from ship captains, naval officers, and terrified sailors, men desperate to prove their loyalty by condemning their former crewmates. The process was swift, but not without drama. Spectators gathered, eager for scandal, to see what a female pirate looked like. Among them stood Anne Bonny and Mary Read, the most infamous women ever to fly the black flag. In 1720, they were captured and brought to trial in Spanish Town, Jamaica. The transcript of that trial still survives, a relic of a world that could not tolerate women who refused to obey it. When Anne Bonny was sentenced to death, she looked to her lover, Calico Jack Rackham, and spat words that would echo through history. If you had fought like a man, you need not have been hanged like a dog. Their defense was simple and desperate: pregnancy. Known as pleading the belly, it was one of the few legal loopholes available to women. A condemned woman who was found to be with child could have her execution delayed until after childbirth. For Anne and Mary, it worked, temporarily. Mary Read would die of fever in prison before her sentence could be carried out. Anne Bonny simply disappeared from the records. Did she escape? Was she freed? Or buried in an unmarked grave beneath the Jamaican soil? History never says. For others, there was no mystery, only the gallows. Execution Dock, on the banks of the River Thames, was where the British Empire made its statement to the world. The dock itself was a wooden platform stretching into the muddy waters of Wapping, and on the day of an execution, crowds would gather for hours. The air would fill with the cries of hawkers selling ale, the nervous laughter of onlookers, and the heavy toll of church bells from St. Paul's. Under the Piracy Act of 1698, passed by King William III, piracy became a capital crime. All and every person so offending shall suffer pains of death, it declared. No exceptions. The condemned were taken from Newgate Prison, paraded through the streets in an open cart under armed guard. They were jeered at, cursed, and spat upon. By the time they reached the dock, they were already half dead from exhaustion and humiliation. Women were rare among the condemned, but when they were led to the gallows, the spectacle was even greater. Some in the crowd came to see if the rumors were true. Could women truly be pirates? Could they fight, steal, kill? When the noose was placed around their necks, the murmur of disbelief turned to silence. Unlike executions on land, the drop at Execution Dock was short. The victims did not die instantly. Instead, they struggled for several agonizing minutes, a grotesque dance the crowds called the Marshal's Dance. When their bodies finally fell still, they were left hanging until three tides had washed over them. For men, it was a warning. For women, it was an erasure. One such woman was Mary Critchett, an American who joined a band of escaped convicts turned pirates in 1729. Captured near Virginia, she was brought to Williamsburg, tried, and hanged without delay. No pleas, no defense, no delay of sentence. She was simply another name in a long list of those who defied empire and lost. Before the rope came the whip. Flogging, one of the oldest and cruelest punishments in maritime history, was as much about public humiliation as it was about pain. For women, it was worse, a deliberate spectacle. The cat-o'-nine tails, a whip made of 9 knotted cords, could tear skin from bone with every lash. The sound alone could silence a crowd. Sentences ranged from 12 lashes to 100 or more, depending on the offense. Executions drew crowds, but so did floggings. People gathered on the docks, their children hoisted onto shoulders to watch. The punishment was often carried out at noon, under the brutal Caribbean sun. The condemned woman was stripped to the waist, tied to a post, and whipped until her back ran red. For the Admiralty, the message was simple. Women who fought like men would be broken like them, and worse. Even Anne Bonny and Mary Red, though spared the whip by circumstance, were kept in deplorable conditions before their trial. Others were not so fortunate. In colonial ports across the West Indies and the Americas, countless unnamed women endured the lash before disappearing from the records entirely. Not all were executed. Some were sold. In the chaos of colonial trade, piracy, and slavery, many captured women were forced into concubinage, plantation labor, or domestic servitude. The lines between piracy and slavery blurred in places like Portobello, Cartagena, and Havana. Women, especially those of African, indigenous, or mixed descent, were often categorized as spoils of war when pirate ships were captured. They were sent to plantations, absorbed into households, or taken as mistresses by colonial officers. The archives list them only as prisoners, servants, or cargo. Their fates are not written in verdicts, but in silence. And that silence is the loudest testimony of all. For others, punishment came slowly. In the 18th century, when prisons overflowed and colonies filled with captives, the British turned old warships into floating prisons. Anchored off ports like Portsmouth and Kingston, they became dark, airless coffins. The prisoners, pirates, rebels, debtors, were chained below deck in filth and darkness. The air stank of rot, disease, and despair. Typhus, dysentery, and smallpox spread rapidly. Food was maggot-ridden, water scarce. Women, though few, were doubly vulnerable, subject to starvation, illness, and exploitation by guards. Many never left those ships. No execution records marked their deaths. They simply vanished beneath the waves, unnamed, unremembered. In the end, the punishment of female pirates was not just about law, it was about control. It was about an empire terrified of women who dared to live without permission. To the men who ruled the seas, a woman on a ship was already a superstition, a curse. But a woman commanding one? That was rebellion. And so, the empire silenced them, with rope, with whip, with slavery, and with forgetting. Yet their stories survive, in fragments, in whispers, in the stubborn persistence of history. Anne Bonny, Mary Red, Mary Critchett, and countless others whose names we will never know. Their ghosts still haunt the waves, not as warnings, but as reminders. That courage often comes from those the world refuses to see. The more corrupt the state, wrote Tacitus, the more numerous the laws. Perhaps he was right, for in the age of empire, law itself became a weapon, and justice, a privilege reserved for men.